types of valuation required in case of startup entities. So basically, there are two types of valuations are required in case of startup entities. Number one is pre-money valuation, and number two is the post-money valuation. Now, the question is, how do we differentiate it, and why do we have to have pre-money valuation and the post-money valuation? So the answer, of course, is very simple. Whenever a private equity or a venture capital or an angel investor is trying to infuse capital in a startup entity, his objective, of course, is to maximize his return from this investment, and therefore he would always like to know as to what is going to be the post money valuation. That means जब वो पैसा लगा देगा और वो जो पैसा लगाएगा उस पैसे का स्टार्टअप में यूज होने के बाद में बिजनेस का वैल्यूएशन क्या होगा, and that is what he is interested to find out as to what is the post money valuation. That means when he puts his money into the business or that money is used in the business, after that money has been used in the business, how are going to be the valuations of the enterprise, of the entity, of the startup entity. That is your post money valuation. Contrary to this, you have pre-money valuation, and that means what? That means valuation of the startup entity as it stands today, and that is the pre-money valuation. So the pre-money valuation is done for deciding the price at which the angel investor or the private equity investor or the venture fund will come into the startup entity. That is so pre-money will decide the price at which he will enter into the startup entity. Post-money valuation will let him know as to what is going to be his return from this business or this startup entity. So this is the difference between the pre-money valuation and the post-money valuation, and we also understood as to what is the purpose of pre-money valuation and the post-money valuation. So these are the two types of the valuations which are there in case of a startup entity. Now let us look at the funding stages in case of startup entities. So which are the funding stages? So number one, you have pre-seed funding, which is also known as bootstrapping or ideation stage. Pre-seed funding यानी कि आपको प्लांट करना है, तो पौधा लगाना है. पौधा लगाने के पहले आप क्या क्या काम करते हो? आप जमीन को साफ करते हो, पौधा लेके आते हो. दैट इज द आइडिया. दैट इज द आइडिया. जमीन को साफ करते हो, तैयारी करते हो. सो दैट इज योर pre-seed funding. So that means before you plant the idea into a business entity, that is your pre-seed funding. तो pre-seed funding में कौन पैसा देगा? Who will do the financing at the pre-seed funding? Remember, pre-seed funding money will come, number one, from the savings of the promoter himself. So सबसे पहले उसको अपनी खुद की जेब से पैसा लगाना पड़ेगा. That is source number one. Source number two, parents and in-laws, in case if he is married. If he is not married, then only parents. So the second source for pre-seed funding is going to be the parents and the in-laws, and third is going to be friends and relatives. So primarily these are the three sources for the pre-seed funding. Now pre-seed funding करने के बाद में when you have started your entity, you have started your business, and उसमें दिखने लगा है कि it is now sprouting. So there is a possibility that's where the company will come into existence and the company will run. Those possibilities, when they start becoming visible, it is at that time what you get is that is your seed funding. And where will this seed funding come from? So these seed funding will come from incubators or accelerators or angel investors. So there are a lot of people who have money and they would like to promote new businesses to come into existence, set up their business, become successful. So these are the people, they would be able to, or they would provide the seed capital. So that is the source of funding at the seed capital stage. अब प्री सीडिंग हो गई और सीडिंग भी हो गई. अब क्या है, अब आपका जो कंपनी है वो एग्जिस्टेंस में आ चुकी है, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर कुछ कुछ तैयार हो चुका है, कुछ लोगों को हायर किया जा चुका है और प्रोडक्ट डेवलपमेंट चालू है, और प्रोडक्ट के डेवलपमेंट के साथ साथ उसके मोनेटाइजेशन की पॉसिबिलिटी आर ऑल्सो एस्टेब्लिश। सो इट इज़ बिकमिंग क्लियर कि ये जो स्टार्टअप है, वो स्टार्टअप जो सर्विस लेके आ रहा है, जो प्रोडक्ट लेके आ रहा है, वो प्रोडक्ट कमर्शियली वाइबल है, कमर्शियली मोनेटाइजेबल है, and that is where you will have the series funding started, right? So you will have A, B, C, D and E, and so many such series funding will start happening. Who will bring the money at this stage? Obviously the people who will bring money at this stage are going to be the professional investors. So the private equities will come at this stage, the venture capital fund, they will come at this stage. And please remember, the private equity will come, or the venture capital fund will come, not because they have a love for the promoter for the product or for the company. No, they will simply come because they see an opportunity in this company, in this startup, of making extraordinary profit for themselves. And that is where you will have the A series funding. And after A series funding, remember, it can go to B, C, D, E, F, and that is for the purpose of scaling. तो स्टार्टअप एंटिटी चालू हो गई और उसके ऑपरेशंस बढ़ रहे हैं, and when the operations are increasing, so obviously depending on the different kind of startup, it is possible that a startup may require A series funding, B series funding, C series funding, D series funding, E series funding in stages. And it is also possible whereas the another startup may still be able to be fully functional with A or B or C series of funding. But ultimately who comes for the funding at this stage? These are the professional investors. And when I say professional investors, what does it mean? It simply means it's the private equity, or it is the venture capital fund who will come and put their money into such businesses. And after the product and the company is fully operational, functional, and the product is ready in the market, it is being monetized, company is generating revenues, hopefully company is also making profit. If the company is making profit, it is still better. If the company is not making profit, then it becomes a challenge to market the IPO. But at the appropriate time, the angel in the private equity or the venture capital fund, they would like to take an exit. And for the purpose of exit, they will wait for. Can you please mute yourself? Okay, very good. So the finally it is the IPO stage. So at the IPO stage, remember, two things can happen. Number one, it may be purely OFS, and that is offer for sale, which means what? Which means company has become profitable, and now the private equity, the angel investor, and the venture capital funds, they may like to take an exit because they see a good opportunity of getting an exit at a very attractive price. So that is what it can happen. It can also happen in combinations, in the sense that partly it can be OFS and partly it can be IPO. And that means through the IPO, money will come to the company, and through the OFS, money will go to the earlier investors. So these are, friends, stages in case of startup entities. So as I have mentioned to you, what are the sources, who are the financiers for startup entities? Personal savings, parents and in-laws, friends and relatives, crowdfunding, incubator and accelerator, and angel investor. Now these are the people who will do who are the sources of pre-seed and seed capital. Then series A to E, or even further, these sources are professional investors, that would include venture capital and the private equity. And finally, when it comes to the IPO, it's going to be mixed group, so including the people. So these, friends, are the financiers in case of startup entities. So what are the principal approaches and methods for valuation of startup entities? And let me tell you, friends, this of course is very simple. It doesn't really matter as to what is the asset that you want to value. In principle, for all the assets, in any part, there are three principal approaches for the purpose of valuation, and that is market approach, income approach, and the cost approach. And these three approaches are also applicable equally in case of the startup entities as well. And under the market approach, there are different methods. So it can be initial investment, a recent round of funding. That's where you have PORI, and PORI is price of recent investment, and then you have PORT, which is price of recent transaction. Then you can also have under the comparable approach multiple methods, multiples you can use for the purpose of finding out the value. So these broadly are the in principle methods used for the purpose of valuation. Now, what are the specific methods for valuation? So the specific methods for valuation
Sir, your voice is not coming.
no, there's just some little okay, no worries. So what are the specific methods for the valuation of the startup entities? Number one is the venture capital method. We will discuss about it. Burkus method, scorecard valuation method, risk factor summation method, cost to duplicate method. And what does it mean? कॉस्ट टू डुप्लीकेट मेथड का सिंपल सा मतलब ये है कि ये जो वेंचर है, ये जो स्टार्टअप एंटिटी है, और ये जिस स्टेज पर है उस स्टेज तक अगर किसी दूसरी एंटिटी को लाना हो तो कितनी कॉस्ट इनकर होगी, दैट इज सपोज टू बी दी वैल्यू ऑफ दैट स्टार्टअप एंटिटी. प्लीज रिमेंबर, डुप्लीकेट का मतलब ये है कि वो जो स्टार्टअप एंटिटी है उसने जो कॉस्ट इनकर करी है वो रिलेवेंट नहीं है. व्हाट इज रिलेवेंट इज कि जिस स्टेज पर ये स्टार्टअप एंटिटी है उस स्टेज तक किसी नई एंटिटी को लाने के लिए कितना कॉस्ट इनकर करना पड़ेगा, एंड दैट इज द वैल्यूएशन डन यूजिंग द कॉस्ट टू डुप्लीकेट मेथड. Then you got a discounted cash flow method. We all understand the discounted cash flow method. As I said little while ago, discounted cash flow method, friends, remember, is more fundamental and more reliable, more dependable, more accurate, more precise for the purpose of valuation. And discounted cash flow method का simple सा मतलब ये है, find out as to how much cash this business is going to generate over next 5, 10, 20 years. Then you can use the two-stage discounting model. Using the two-stage discounting model, you can find out as to what is going to be the present value of the future cash flows. So what is going to be the present value for the explicit forecast period, and what is going to be the present value of the cash flows during the terminal period. Combine these two totals together and you get the value of that enterprise or of that startup entity. That is your discounted cash flow method. Then you have valuation by stage method. Comparable method, we all understand comparable method का मतलब क्या है. So you try and find out a startup entity which is similar in nature and like that to the same as the target startup entity. So जिस startup entity का valuation करना चाहते हैं उसके जैसी कोई दूसरी स्टार्टअप एंटिटी जिसका वैल्यूएशन हो चुका है उसके नंबर्स को आप पिकअप करिए, उसके वैल्यूएशन को आप पिकअप करिए, और वो वैल्यूएशन को ऑन सम कॉमन कंपेरेबल बेसिस यू कैन फाइंड आउट एज टू व्हाट शुड बी द वैल्यू ऑफ दिस टारगेट startup entity that you have. Book value method, of course, is very simple, but it is not relevant in my view because book value method will not take into account the revenue earning potential of the startup entity that you are trying to value. Book value method will simply do the valuation based on the cost that has been incurred on the startup entity, that in my view is not sufficient. So this method is used, this method can be used to find out as to what is the downside as far as the valuation is concerned. But the book value method will not give you the real valuation of a startup entity, because the value of a startup entity is not in the cost which has been incurred on that startup entity. Valuation of a startup entity is in the value that this startup is going to create in future. So for example, IRCTC. Now what IRCTC is doing, IRCTC is creating value. What value IRCTC is creating? Because of IRCTC, today you do not have to go to the railway station, stand in the queue and wait for your number and then book a ticket. Today what you have to do, you can simply open your laptop and do the railway booking. And please remember, you are not the only person. Millions of people are doing booking every day using the IRCTC. And please remember, these millions of people into 365 days, into the money that they would save in petrol, the time that they would save, and that value, when you combine it together, that is the value what IRCTC is creating. So if you try to do the valuation of IRCTC using the book value method, obviously you will come to a valuation which is erroneous. So principally, fundamentally, the tool is available but may not be very effective as far as the valuation of startup entities are concerned. Then we will talk about the potential value at the exit method, some of the part or SOTP method, and finally, of course, we will talk about the first Chicago method. So let us now look at the methods that we have spoken but not discussed. So the one is venture capital method, VCM. Now, as you can see, what the venture capital method is, obviously, as the name suggests, now this is the method which is used by the venture capital funds for the purpose of doing the evaluation of startup entities. It is applicable more in case of pre-revenue startups, because invariably the venture capital funds will enter into a startup entity at the pre-revenue startup, pre-revenue stage. At the post-revenue stage, you will have the private equity funds coming in. So that is how the venture capital methods are. So what does this method do? It follows a formula, and what the formula is number one, determine the terminal value of the business in the last projected period. So ये जो venture capital fund है, which is wanting or planning to put money into this startup entity, first what it will do, ये मालूम करेगा कि terminal value क्या है. एंड हाँ, टर्मिनल वैल्यू का मतलब क्या है कि जहाँ पर कंपनी का एक्सप्लिसिट फोरकास्ट पीरियड खत्म होता है, मीनिंग व्हाट, मीनिंग द टाइम सिंस व्हेन द कंपनी will stop growing at a super growth rate and will start growing at the normal rate. That is the time which is known as terminal period. So the firstly what you do, you find out as to what is the terminal value of this entity, where of this startup entity where the venture capital fund is wanting to invest money. Now what you do, discount the terminal value of investors discount rate to find the post money valuation. तो आपने क्या किया, आपने टर्मिनल वैल्यू मालूम करी, और वो टर्मिनल वैल्यू, प्लीज रिमेंबर, टर्मिनल वैल्यू का मतलब क्या है कि जो जहाँ पर एक्सप्लिसिट फोरकास्ट पीरियड खत्म होता है, वहाँ से टर्मिनल पीरियड स्टार्ट होता है. तो टर्मिनल पीरियड का जो कैश फ्लो है, दैट इज व्हाट यू फाइंड आउट यूजिंग द टू स्टेज डिस्काउंटिंग मॉडल. But remember, you have found out the cash flow, but that cash flow is in future. So what you need to do, you need to convert that future cash flow in terms of present value. And how do you convert that future cash flow in terms of present value? By using the investors discount rate. तो वो जो भी उसकी cost of capital होगी, उस cost of capital से you do the discounting of the cash flow during the terminal period. That will give you the post money valuation. And now what you do, from the post money valuation, you deduct the pre money valuation, and so as to arrive the return that the venture capital is going to get. And this, friends, is your venture capital method. Then you got a Burkus method. Now Burkus method, it assigns a range of values to the progress startup business owner has made in their attempts to get the startup off the ground. तो कहने का क्या मतलब है, कहने का मतलब है कि बरकस जो मेथड है उसके हिसाब से आप मालूम करते हैं कि हाउ इज़ द आइडिया, is the idea sound of the product that the startup is planning to make? Is the product prototype ready? So if the prototype is ready, that means you are reducing the technology risk. And then you look at the quality management team, so that is reducing the execution risk. So if you are confident about the quality management team, that means you have surety about the execution happening. Then you look at the strategic relationship, and that means you are trying to reduce the market risk. Strategic relationship का मतलब क्या है? Has the company done tie-up for the marketing and the sales of the product or the services which the startup entity is going to make? If those tie-ups have been in place, that means the market risk of that company is reduced. And finally, you look at the product rollout or sales. So is the product ready and rolled out already? And that means the product risk is also taken care of. So all these factors are taken into account using the Burkus method to arrive at the value of a startup entity. Scorecard valuation method. Now again, what you do, firstly, in case of scorecard valuation method, what you need to do is you need to find out average pre-money valuation of other seed और स्टार्टअप बिजनेस. तो पहले आपको क्या करना पड़ेगा? सबसे पहले फॉर फाइंडिंग आउट वैल्यू ऑफ ए स्टार्टअप एंटिटी यूजिंग द स्कोर कार्ड वैल्यूएशन मेथड, फर्स्टली यू नीड टू फाइंड आउट अनदर स्टार्टअप which is similar in nature and whose valuation is available. So you pick up the valuation of a similar startup and use that number as the basis for the purpose of determining valuation of your startup. That is step number one. And after doing the step number one, then what you do you come to the step number two and find out the pre-money valuation of the target company using the SVM to compare, यानी कि स्कोर कार्ड वैल्यूएशन. तो आप क्या करेंगे? आप ये 7 फैक्टर्स है, तो ये 7 फैक्टर्स जिस स्टार्टअप का आपको वैल्यूएशन करना है तो आपने क्या किया? आपने सबसे पहले एक कंपेरेबल स्टार्टअप जो कि रेडी है, जिसकी वैल्यूएशन आपके पास में अवेलेबल है, आपने वो वैल्यूएशन को पिकअप किया. लेट अस से दैट वैल्यूएशन इज कमिंग टू 1000 crore. That valuation is coming to 1000 crore. Now what you will do? Now you will do the evaluation of the startup, the target startup जिसका क्या आपको valuation करना है on these 7 parameters. So what these 7 parameters are? Firstly, you will look at the strength of the management and you will assign number between 0 to 30. ठीक है. तो स्ट्रेंथ ऑफ मैनेजमेंट, सो ऑब्वियसली एज अ वेंचर कैपिटल फंड और एज अ प्राइवेट इक्विटी फंड और एज अ वैल्यूएशन प्रोफेशनल, what you will do, you will need to interact with the management and come to a conclusion about the efficiency and effectiveness of the management team of that startup, and based on your understanding you will assign a number. Let's say you assign a number here of 20, right? You assign a number of 20. Then you will look at the size of the opportunity. तो वो जो स्टार्टअप है और उसका जो प्रोडक्ट है, उसकी जो सर्विस है, उसका क्या पोटेंशियल है आपके हिसाब से, आपकी अंडरस्टैंडिंग में. एंड दैट इज वेयर यू विल हैव टू यूज योर जजमेंट. सो यूजिंग योर जजमेंट यू विल डू द इवेल्युएशन ऑफ साइज ऑफ द अपॉर्चुनिटी एंड असाइन नंबर between 0 to 25. So obviously that is where as a valuation professional you will have to use your expertise, your knowledge, your understanding, your experience and come to a number कि भाई ये जो बिजनेस है, ये जो स्टार्टअप है, एंटिटी जिसका क्या आपको वैल्यूएशन करना है, उसकी जो अपॉर्चुनिटी है वो कितनी अच्छी है या बुरी है या बहुत अच्छी है. एंड दैट्स वेयर यू हैव टू गिव अ नंबर. एंड लेट्स से फॉर एग्जांपल आउट ऑफ 0 to 25 अगेन यू गिव अ नंबर ऑफ 20. Then you look at the product and the technology. Again, that's where you will have to use your knowledge, your expertise, and not only you will have to use your knowledge and expertise, but maybe you may also have to take the help of other professionals who understand technology, who understand product. Take their views and combine with your views. Again, assign a number to the product and the technology which is being used by this startup. And again, what you need to do, you need to give a number from 0 to 15. And let's say, for example, in your understanding you come to a number of 10. Competitive environment. So maybe this startup entity, the product that they have is so unique, there is no competition. And that means what? That means there is no competition, and therefore you can afford to give a number of 10 on account of the competitive environment. Then you will need to do the evaluation of marketing, sales channel and partnerships. As I was telling you a little while ago कि marketing का क्या बंदोबस्त है, sales का क्या बंदोबस्त है, partnership कितने strategic alliances कितने किए हुए हैं. Do the analysis of them and find out as to where does it stand. And let's say, for example, from 0 to 10% you have to give a marking, and let's say that marking is 5. Need of additional investment, you find out, you give a marking of 2.5. Other factors, whatever they may be, you give a marking of 2.5, right? So what you have done, you have done the evaluation of all these 7 factors, and you have assigned these numbers. So 20 plus 20, 40, 50, 60, and this is 70. So what is happening is the scorecard, using the SVM method, you are getting a number of 70, right? And you had picked up valuation of a similar enterprise, similar startup entity whose valuation is available to you. That valuation you realize is 1000, and the score that you are getting for this startup whose valuation you want to do is coming 70%. So it's 1000 into 70%, and what you get, the value of this enterprise is 700 crore. So this is how you will do the valuation using the scorecard valuation method. Risk factor summation method. Let me tell you, friends, it is more like the scorecard valuation method. So ये जो risk factor summation method है और scorecard valuation method है, दोनों में बहुत ज़्यादा फर्क नहीं है. फर्क इतना है कि in case of scorecard valuation method, you will use these operating 7 factors which are available or applicable in case of the startup entity whose valuation you want to do. In case of the risk factor summation method, you don't use the operating factor. What you look at is, you look at the risk factors, and there are 12 risk factors on which you have to do the evaluation. क्या मतलब है कहने का मतलब ये है कि मैनेजमेंट की क्या रिस्क है, स्टेज ऑफ द बिजनेस की क्या रिस्क है, लेजिस्लेशन पॉलिटिकल क्या रिस्क है, मैन्युफैक्चरिंग की क्या रिस्क है, सेल्स एंड मार्केटिंग की क्या रिस्क है, फंडिंग एंड कैपिटल की क्या रिस्क है, कंपटीशन की क्या रिस्क है, टेक्नोलॉजी की क्या रिस्क है, लिटिगेशन की क्या रिस्क है, इंटरनेशनल रिस्क अगर कुछ है तो क्या है, रेपुटेशन रिस्क क्या है, एंड पोटेंशियल ल्यूक्रेटिव एग्जिट की क्या पोटेंशियल है. तो ये 12 फैक्टर्स पर आप क्या करते हैं, आप इस स्टार्टअप एंटिटी को इवेल्युएट करते हैं ऑन दीज 12 फैक्टर्स. एंड व्हाट यू डू, you again find out the score and you compare that score with 24. How do you find out how do you evaluate these 12 factors of risk? Now this is how you will do the evaluation of all these 12 factors, all these 12 risk factors. तो आप पहले +2 का स्कोर दे सकते हैं, +1 का स्कोर दे सकते हैं, 0 का स्कोर दे सकते हैं, -1 का स्कोर दे सकते हैं, -2 का स्कोर दे सकते हैं, डिपेंडिंग ऑन व्हाट इज योर व्यू. फॉर एग्जांपल, अगर आपको सबसे पहले जो मैनेजमेंट है, मैनेजमेंट का एवेल्युएशन करना है, रिस्क एवेल्युएशन करना है, तो आपके हिसाब से मैनेजमेंट का आपने एवेल्युएशन किया तो आपको ये 5 में से एक स्कोर देना पड़ेगा. और कैसे देंगे आप स्कोर? वेरी पॉजिटिव फॉर ग्रोइंग द कंपनी एंड एग्जीक्यूटिंग अ वंडरफुल एग्जिट. कहने का क्या मतलब है कि आपने मैनेजमेंट से चर्चा करी, मैनेजमेंट से बात करी, मैनेजमेंट टीम से मिले, मैनेजमेंट टीम से आपने इंटरेक्शन किया, मैनेजमेंट टीम से इंटरेक्शन करने के बाद में आपको ये मालूम पड़ा कि ये मैनेजमेंट टीम बहुत स्ट्रांग है, बहुत बढ़िया है, और ये मैनेजमेंट फंटास्टिक काम करेगी, ये मैनेजमेंट टीम इस स्टार्टअप को बहुत आगे लेके जाएगी. तो आप क्या करेंगे, आप उसको 2 का स्कोर देंगे. आपको लगता है कि ठीक ठीक है तो आप उसको 1 का स्कोर देंगे. आपको लगता है कि न्यूट्रल है तो आपको 0 का स्कोर देंगे. आपको लगता है कि मैनेजमेंट टीम अच्छी नहीं है, आप उसको -, का स्कोर देंगे. और आपको लगता है कि मैनेजमेंट टीम रद्दड़ है, बेकार है, तो आप उसको -2 का स्कोर देंगे. सो दिस इज हाउ व्हाट यू विल डू. यू विल डू द इवैल्यूएशन ऑफ ऑल दीज 12 रिस्क फैक्टर्स एंड असाइन देम दीज नंबर्स एज आई हैव जस्ट डिस्कस विद यू. और ये 12 जो फैक्टर्स हैं उनका जो आपने एवेल्यूशन किया है उसका आप टोटल लेंगे. और आप उस टोटल को कंपेयर करेंगे विद 24. सो से फॉर एग्जांपल हमने जो स्कोर कार्ड वैल्यूएशन मेथड में मालूम एक कंपनी को पिकअप किया था और उस कंपनी का वैल्यूएशन था 1000 करोड़. आपने ये 12 जो फैक्टर्स हैं, इन 12 फैक्टर्स का आपने वैल्यूएशन किया और इसका जो स्कोर आया वो आया 12. सो 12 डिवाइडेड बाय 24 into 1000, and that means valuation of this startup entity is going to be 500 crore using the risk factor summation method. Rahul, we might take another 5-7 minutes. Is that okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, that's okay.
Okay. Thank you, Rahul. Right. The another method is valuation of stage methods. So what you do in that case is again you find out as to what is the stage at which the entity is in terms of exciting business idea, business plan, strong management, final product or technology, strategic alliances. So you will see that there are a lot of similarities between the valuation of stage method or the risk factor summation method or the scorecard valuation method. Potential value at exit method. So basically this is again applicable in case of the early stage investors, and the early stage investor will mean the angel investor or the venture capital funds. So what they will try and find out, they will try and find out the potential value at the exit, and which is same like the first method that we discussed, and that's where they will try and find out as to what is going to be the post money valuation. That means using your using the cash flow of the terminal period and using your discounted rate or your expected rate of return or your cost of capital, you will try and find out as to what is going to be the post money value at the time of exit, and from that you minus your investment. That gives you an idea as to what is the return that you are going to incur as a venture capital or as the early investor. Then you got a sum of the parts method, SOTP. It simply would mean in case of a business, startup entity is having multiple products, and if it is having multiple products, then what you will need to do, using any of these methods, you will need to do the valuation of all the individual units of the startup entity, then sum them up together, and the combined value of all the entities, all the verticals, all the divisions, all the products, all the markets will be the sum of the parts SOTP method. And then of course the first Chicago method. So the first Chicago method or the, again this is again a venture capital method. It is a situation specific business valuation, and what it does, the first Chicago method, what it does, it use the combination of what, combination of multiple based valuation and the discounted cash flow method, and that is how it does the valuation. So when you have to do the valuation of a startup entity, so maybe what you will do using the scorecard valuation method or the risk factor method, you will find out the value which is nothing but a comparable method. And what you will also do simultaneously, you will do the discounted cash flow of the startup entity and find out the value based on the discounted cash flow as well, and then use the valuation as arrived using the scorecard value method or the risk factor method and the discounted cash flow method in a combination which appears to be more appropriate in your judgment, and use that value as the value for the startup entity. So friends, with this these 12 methods of specific methods for the valuation of startup entities, now let us discuss some of the questions. The question number 1 is, why do valuations of startup entities increase at every stage, every subsequent stage? तो हम सभी देखते हैं कि इकोनॉमिक टाइम्स हो, फाइनेंशियल एक्सप्रेस हो, कोई सा भी पेपर हो, तो हम देखते हैं कि जब भी किसी स्टार्टअप का वैल्यूएशन ए सीरीज से बी सीरीज पे जाता है, बी सीरीज से सी सीरीज पे जाता है, सी सीरीज से डी सीरीज पे जाता है, डी सीरीज से ई सीरीज पे जाता है, तो हम देखते हैं कि उसके वैल्यूएशन बड़े होते हैं. सो एवरी टाइम द वैल्यूएशन इज इंक्रीजिंग. why is that the valuation increases at every subsequent stage? And that is, of course, is very simple. And the reason behind is the risk factor or the discount factor. So remember, earlier, at the earliest of these stages, in case of a startup, the risk is very high. Since the risk is very high, discounting has to be done at a very high rate. As the company progresses from the seed pre-seed stage to the seed stage, from the seed stage to the A series and B series and things like that, remember, at every stage company has created something more tangible. So company बन चुकी है, उसके बाद प्रोडक्ट बन चुका है, प्रोडक्ट का ट्रायल हो चुका है, टेस्ट मार्केटिंग हो चुकी है. सो एट एवरी स्टेज what is happening is there is some landmark being achieved. और याद रखिए, जितने ज़्यादा लैंडमार्क्स और माइलस्टोन्स अचीव होते जाएंगे, उस कंपनी की उतनी रिस्क कम होती जाएगी. और जितनी कंपनी की रिस्क कम होती जाएगी, उतना उस कंपनी का डिस्काउंटिंग फैक्टर कम होते जाएगा. और जितना उसका डिस्काउंटिंग फैक्टर कम होते जाएगा, कंपनी के वैल्यूएशन अकॉर्डिंगली बढ़ते जाएंगे. तो मैं आपको एक छोटा सा एग्जांपल देता हूं कि देखिए, टर्मिनल वैल्यू इज स्टिल द सेम एंड इट शुड बी सेम, बिकॉज अल्टीमेटली जो आपकी कंपनी का मार्केट है, जनरली स्पीकिंग जो भी मार्केट है वो सेम रहने वाला है. every year your market is not going to increase, so your terminal value cannot change every year, should not change every year. So let's say you determine the terminal value of your business or the startup entity to be 1000. So at the stage of the startup, remember, it is extremely risky. At the stage of the startup, at the stage of bootstrapping, it is extremely risky. Nobody knows as to what is going to happen to that startup entity. Since it is extremely risky, you will, let's say for example, you will do the discounting of the cash flows or the terminal value at 0.7%. And then you, at the pre-stage, risk has reduced, so you will do the discounting at 0.6. Now remember, all these numbers that I have taken just to explain to you. You can of course do in real life more accurate calculations and use the discounting factor accordingly. अब ए सीरीज का फंड रेजिंग हो रही है. ए सीरीज तक आने में कंपनी का काफ़ी कुछ खड़ा हो चुका है. तो जितना कंपनी की का प्रोग्रेस हो चुकी है, जितना कंपनी का इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर बन चुका है, जितना कंपनी का डेवलपमेंट हो चुका है, उतनी इस कंपनी के सर्वाइवल की रिस्क कम हो चुकी है. तो अगर रिस्क कम हो गई है, तो ऑब्वियसली द डिस्काउंटिंग फैक्टर विल कीप डिक्रीजिंग, एंड दिस इज हाउ इट विल हैपन. एंड यू कैन सी हियर एट एवरी स्टेज द वैल्यूएशंस आर increasing, and that is what we need to remember when we see the valuations being done at subsequent series. How should discounting factor expected rate of return progress since inception and why? And to from the personal savings, parent in-laws, friends and relatives, crowdfunding से लेके पब्लिक तक आने में जो डिस्काउंटिंग फैक्टर है उसकी क्या प्रोग्रेस होनी चाहिए. फ्रॉम टॉप टू बॉटम इट शुड डिक्रीज एट ईच स्टेज. एंड व्हाई शुड दैट हैपन? एंड दैट इज व्हाट आई हैव एक्सप्लेन टू यू. सो डिस्काउंटिंग फैक्टर इज डिक्रीजिंग एट एवरी स्टेज. How should discounting factor progress since inception? I have explained this to you. How should be the per share valuation at each stage since inception? So how should be the per share valuation at each stage since inception? तो जैसे जैसे कंपनी प्रोग्रेस करती जाएगी, अज्यूमिंग दैट देयर इज अ पॉजिटिव डेवलपमेंट, कंपनी के शेयर की प्राइस हर स्टेज पर बढ़ती जाएगी. एंड दैट इज हाउ यू सी when a startup comes out with the IPO, it is at that point that the IPO price is, the price at the IPO stage is the highest, and that is because at that stage risk is the least, and since the risk is the least, the discounting has to be done at a lower cost of capital, and that is how the share price increases. Which is the ideal method for startup valuation and why? तो हमने इतने सारे मेथड्स डिस्कस किए. अब सवाल ये होता है कि इसमें से आइडियल मेथड कौन सा है. तो मैं आपको कहूँ कि कोई सा भी मेथड आइडियल हो सकता है जो कि आपको फेयर वैल्यू करके दे. एंड दैट इज, सो एनी मेथड दैट गिव्स यू द फेयर वैल्यू is the ideal method. So method which is fair to the investor as well as to the startup is the ideal method. So remember, value of any business lies only in the cash that it generates. So किसी बिजनेस की वैल्यू इससे मालूम नहीं पड़ेगी कि कितने लोग मॉल में आए, इससे नहीं मालूम पड़ेगी कि कितने लोगों ने पोर्टल पे विजिट किया, इससे नहीं मालूम पड़ेगी कितने लोग आके चले गए. किसी भी बिजनेस की वैल्यू मालूम पड़ेगी कि कितने लोगों ने कितने का माल खरीदा और कितने का माल खरीदने वाले हैं, और वो जो माल खरीदा है उसकी का क्या कॉस्ट है, उससे मालूम पड़ेगा कि कंपनी की वैल्यू क्या है. सो अल्टीमेटली वैल्यू ऑफ एनी बिजनेस लाइज इन द कैश दैट इट generates. How to figure out whether a method is really fair? In my understanding, any valuation which is going to give at least a return of 12 to 15% to the investor, that in my view is a fair value. अगर इन्वेस्टर पैसा लगाए और उसका पैसा डूब जाए, पेटीएम में हुआ और रिलायंस टेलीकॉम, रिलायंस पावर में हुआ, LIC में हुआ. Now people have invested their money and there's so many stocks they are quoting at discount even after years. So can you say that the pricing of IPO pricing of Paytm was fair pricing? And because जिन लोगों ने 2155 में वो शेयर को खरीदा, आज वो घिस पिट के 600 के पास पहुंच रहा है. That means those people have suffered a loss of 1600 or thereabout. So what is a fair value? It can change from person to person. लेकिन मेरे हिसाब से कोई भी इन्वेस्टमेंट अगर आपको 12 से लेके 15% का रिटर्न दे रहा है, you can think it is a fair value. अगर उससे कम है तो मेरे ख्याल से उतना ज़्यादा फेयर नहीं है, और अगर आपका रिटर्न नेगेटिव है तो फिर वो वैल्यू बिल्कुल भी फेयर नहीं है. रोल ऑफ प्रोफेशनल्स इन सपोर्टिंग स्टार्टअप. So number one, all of us as the finance professionals, as chartered accountants, cost accountants, company secretaries, MBAs, and of course valuation professionals, we have a huge role to play in this ecosystem. And so first thing that we can do as valuation professional, startup है, कुछ उसको मालूम नहीं है, इट इज़ टेकन फॉर ग्रांटेड कि एक टेक्नोक्रेट को कुछ मालूम नहीं होगा. तो हम क्या कर सकते हैं? वी कैन हेल्प हिम प्रिपेयर द कैश फ्लो, प्रिपेयर द बिजनेस प्लान एंड प्रिपेयर द स्ट्रेटेजी, बिकॉज अल्टीमेटली दैट विल मेक हिम नो एज टू वो जो ड्रीम कर रहे हैं वो खाली ड्रीम है, क्या वो ड्रीम को रियलिटी में कन्वर्ट भी किया जा सकता है. नंबर टू, help him allot sweat equity shares for himself and his key people. Remember, as a startup promoter or startup entity, or in you're putting a lot of efforts up from your side. पूरा समय आपका मन और टाइम उसमें जा रहा है. Maybe you're not drawing a salary also. So does it mean all the efforts that you're putting should not be valued? Of course they have to be valued. And that's where, as the valuation professional or the finance professional, we can help him get sweat equity for all the efforts that he is putting. Why? Because the sweat equity that he will get today, and when this venture really becomes successful, it is going to give him a lot of return at the later stage when the valuations of the company becomes high. Guide him in navigating all the procedural steps. समझ के लीजिए, एंटरप्रेन्योर है, टेक्नोक्रेट है, उसको फाइनेंस का कुछ मालूम नहीं है. डेट इक्विटी रेशियो क्या है कुछ मालूम नहीं मालूम, एबिडा क्या है क्या नहीं मालूम, एबिडा की क्या इंपॉर्टेंस नहीं मालूम, लेवरेज क्या है नहीं मालूम, डेट फंड करना चाहिए यूज करना चाहिए कि नहीं करना चाहिए नहीं मालूम, इक्विटी क्यों यूज करना चाहिए नहीं मालूम, वैल्यूएशन कितने पर होगा नहीं मालूम. एंड दैट इज वेयर वी एज द वैल्यूएशन प्रोफेशनल कैन हेल्प हिम also navigate through all these procedural steps and guide him about the risks involved at every stage, but don't frighten. So any startup that comes to every one of us, we need to guide him of the risks that are involved, because a startup promoter is always full of enthusiasm, maybe over enthusiasm, maybe overconfidence. So he will tend to ignore a lot of risk. देखिए, आपको ये जो जिन कंपनियों के नाम मैंने आपको शुरू में बताए, वो ओला हो, ऊबर हो, पेटीएम हो, जोमेटो हो, ये जो अलीबाबा हो, IRCTC हो, ये जो सारे नाम हम सुनते हैं ना, वो 10% हैं. 90% जिनके हम नाम नहीं सुनते हैं वो डूब गए, वो बंद हो गए. और वो क्यों बंद हो गए? क्योंकि उनको कोई रिस्क बताने वाला नहीं मिला, उनको कोई फाइनेंशियली गाइड करने वाला नहीं मिला. एंड अगर उनको कोई रिस्क बताने वाला मिलता था, उनको फाइनेंशियली कोई गाइड करने वाला मिलता था, आई एम श्योर many of those startups which closed would also been would have survived and would have been floating. So all of us need to guide the promoter or the startup entity कि भाई आप यहाँ पे ऐसा करेंगे तो ये आपको रिस्क है, आपको लेवरेज में ये रिस्क होगा, आपको प्रोडक्ट में ये रिस्क होगा, आपको मार्केट में ये रिस्क होगा, अगर आप डेट लेंगे तो आपको ये रिस्क होगा क्योंकि आप डेट ले रहे हैं लेकिन आपके पास में एबिटा नहीं है, अगर आपके पास में एबिटा नहीं है और आप कर्जा लेके बैठ गए तो वो कर्जे का इंटरेस्ट कहाँ से भरेंगे. सो ऑल दैट ऑल ऑफ अस कैन डू, बट रिमेंबर only do that, don't frighten him. And finally, for your professional fees, explore possibility of taking sweat equity in lieu of professional fees, and that is what I will always advise. तो देखिए जो startup entities हैं, they are always short of cash more often than not, and when you are trying to help a startup entity, maybe you can think in terms of getting your rewards by way of sweat equity instead of getting the cash payment, because if that venture becomes successful, the value of the sweat equity that you will get is going to be much more than the cash fees that you will collect from them. So friends, with this I come to the close of my session. Since I have already exceeded the time, I will just like to share one or two things with you. Number one, you can visit my YouTube channel. There are more than 1500 videos on various aspects of finance, management, leadership, वर्क लाइफ बैलेंस एंड वैल्यूएशंस. तो ये सारे टॉपिक्स के ऊपर 1500 से भी ज़्यादा वीडियोस हैं और आप उनका डेफिनेटली फ़ायदा उठा सकते हैं. सो विजिट माय यूट्यूब चैनल, benefit, like, subscribe and share with all, because spreading the knowledge of finance to everyone, I think is a job of every one of us. You can also connect with me through YouTube or LinkedIn or Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or on WhatsApp, because I keep sharing whatever little that I come to know from time to time with everyone with whom I can share it. So in case you would like to connect with me, I will of course be very happy to do so. So with this, thank you so much to Rahul, and thank you so much to AARWF for giving me this opportunity, and thanks to every one of you for being part of this discussion. Wishing you wonderful times always. Thank you.